What's up, teens? Hope you guys are doing well. My name's Emilio Serna. I work as one of the ministers in Palm Beach, and I absolutely love being a part of the youth and family ministry. I feel like you guys keep me young. You guys are a lot of fun to be around. But today we're going to take some time to look at the longest sermon ever preached by Jesus, but more specifically, the warnings that he tells us about how Satan can use what we value most in life against us. So stay tuned for that. What's up, teens from South Florida? My name's Emilio. I serve in the youth and family ministry in Palm Beach, and I'm excited to be able to share this lesson with you. Honestly, it's me just sharing the things that I've learned from studying this out. So the last few weeks, we've been studying out the Sermon on the Mount. And so last week we had Steve LaFrance talk about light and being the salt of the earth. He was talking about how we need to preserve this world. Jesus calls us to be the one to protect and save those around us by being an example. And today what I want to talk about is storing up our treasures in heaven. And so if you have your Bible, you can look in Matthew 6, and we'll be starting in verse 19. Now, before we read anything, I want to ask a question for you guys to think about. What do you treasure and what do you value? So what do you treasure and what do you value? It could be something tangible, something that you can touch, or it could be something intangible. For instance, it could be maybe you value respect. Maybe you value being in a relationship. Maybe it's fitting in or having the most likes on social media. Or maybe it's having straight A's in all of your classes. But think through, what do you value most in your life? And so we're going to start reading here in verse 19 of Matthew chapter 6. And it says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." And so just focusing back at verse 19 when he says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth." I think of this idea of living in America, right? We're surrounded by this notion of get what you deserve. You only live once. You know, Satan is trying to get us to store up treasures on this earth here and now. And what's so interesting about that is none of these things will last. None of these things we will take with us to the next world. But yet, Satan makes us believe that these are the things that we need to chase the most in life. That if we have enough money, if we have enough popularity, that we will finally find true happiness. But Jesus, right off the bat, talks so plainly about how storing up treasures on earth are meaningless. They will not last. Just a fun fact, I was looking up, doing some research on treasure or things that people value. And I found this cool fact that in the United States, there is 53,000 storage units all over the US. 53,000. Now, just to put that in comparison with McDonald's, there's only 1,400 McDonald's in the US, which when I saw this statistic was mind-blowing, because at least for me where I live, man, every corner I go to, there's McDonald's there. But to know that there's almost 3 times the amount of storage units than there are McDonald's. And as I kept going through those statistics, I also saw that every year there are 155,000 auctions for storage units. And I think what that means is that even though there's 53,000 storage units, every year there are people that pass away. There are people that can't pay the bill for the storage unit, or there are people that just forget the items that they had in there. And I think this just completely reflects this scripture, that we try to store up things on earth, whether it's, items that we have. We don't want to get rid of anything. If we look at our rooms, I'm sure we have clothes that are from middle school or high school, things that we just never want to get rid of because we want to have as much things as possible. But man, in this world, we just see that all of these auctions, all of these storage units go up for auction because people can't take those things with them forever. At some point, we will leave the things behind. But I want to ask you, man, what do you treasure? What do you value? Because whatever you treasure, whatever you value, that's where your heart is going to be leaning towards. And so the three things that we're going to be talking about today are, man, what do you treasure and how that has power over you? So what you treasure, that will orient your heart, meaning it will steer your life in a certain direction because you will be chasing after those things. The second thing is how the things that we treasure will darken our eye, meaning they can blind us. They can kind of make things blurry for us because we lose focus on what is most important and we chase after the things that we feel like will make us happy in the end. And the last thing will be what we treasure will demand our worship, meaning whatever you value most in life, you will be consumed by that. If it's money, if it's popularity, whatever it is for you, whatever it is for me, it will demand our worship because we will not be able to get around the idea that it is the most important thing to us. So before we go any further, I don't want you to get the wrong idea that Jesus is saying here that we can't own a phone, that we can't own a car, or even that we can't, save for the future. Jesus isn't saying any of those things at all. What Jesus is saying is to not lay up for ourselves treasures on earth. Basically, man, stop focusing on the things that don't really matter in the end. Don't focus on things that will just disappear and that our hearts will be chasing after but will never be satisfied. But he calls us to set our hearts on pursuing treasures in heaven, where he says even here in verse 20, where moth and vermin and rust, those things will not be able to destroy them because these things that we are pursuing will last forever. They will be eternal. So a question I have for you guys is, how can we store treasures in heaven? How can we store up treasures in heaven for ourselves like Jesus is saying here? The first thing that comes to mind for myself is performing righteous acts, meaning doing deeds without expecting anything in return, whether that's serving people, whether that's loving, being a peacemaker, but using your resources to serve God without expecting anything in return, without wanting anything back from people. These are just a couple of the ways that we can store up treasures in heaven. What's also interesting is we like to think that our treasures will follow our heart. We like to think that, man, whatever we want, our treasures are going to follow that. But the reality is that Jesus tells us that our heart is going to follow whatever our treasures are. Meaning whatever we value most in life, our heart is going to be right there with them. And so this idea that we think that we're in control of what we want, we're in control, we have a choice to do whatever we want to do, is false, because it's whatever we treasure, that's what we're going to be going after. That's what our heart is going to be pursuing. So whatever you trust, whatever you value, whatever you prize or hold dear, your life is going to flow in that direction. And so we have to be mindful of these things. Going down into verse 22, where he talks about the eye is the lamp of the body. He talks about how, man, our treasures will darken our eye. They will hinder us from being able to see things clearly. They will kind of fog up our vision, right? Because we become so focused on wanting things, on what we can get, that we lose sight of what is most important in our lives. So here, when he talks about how the eye is the lamp of the body, man, he's really talking about how our mind and our hearts, that if our thoughts and motives are filled with evil thoughts, evil desires, greed or pride, man, our whole body will be filled with darkness. But if our thoughts and our motives are pure, then our whole body will be filled with light. And so I think this is why it's so important to watch our life and doctrine closely, to watch what we're trying to live for, what we want most in our lives, because our life is going to flow in that direction. I think so often we can deceive ourselves, but Jesus here warns us about where this life will lead to, right? When we look at our own lives, we think, man, what I'm going after isn't that bad, right? I'm not going after trying to hurt people. I'm not trying to go after, ripping people off. All I want is just a nice car, a great paying job, a beautiful home that has, a 2-car garage. Maybe you want the best clothing, whether that's Adidas or Nikes or whatever it is that you like. But Jesus is warning us that if we continue down that path of just wanting these things more than anything else, that they will lead to destruction, because we will be so consumed by what we have instead of focusing on the eternal things that we are blessed with. And so another question I want to ask is, when is the time that you were blinded because of something you wanted? And what was that outcome? Again, when is the time that you were blinded because of something you wanted? And what was that outcome? When I think of that for myself, man, pursuing being in a relationship, right? I wanted to be in a relationship so bad that I was willing to do whatever it takes. And I think before I knew it, I was blinded by that infatuation. I was blinded by wanting to be in a relationship that I overlooked other peer friendships that I had with brothers. I looked over my family. I started to neglect them because I was just going after this relationship that I wanted more than everything else. But it took someone sitting me down and talking to me saying, man, this is consuming your life. This is overwhelming your life and everything that you do. And once I came to that realization, then I had to take a step back and say, man, my life is heading in this direction that I don't want it to go in. And so I had to kind of take a step back, take a break, and reevaluate what I was trying to go after the most. But think for yourself personally, what are some things that can get in the way and start blinding your vision and consume what you prioritize most in your life? And so these things, these treasures, these prizes, or what we value, can prevent us from seeing the things from God's perspective, right? God and the world's perspectives are two separate things, right? The world wants you to feel like you desire to fit in. You want to be related to. You want to be cool. You want to have all of these things and you will be happy. But God is saying, man, none of these things matter at all, right? In 100 years, which seems like such a long time for us, but it's just mere seconds to God, none of these things will matter, right? When we look at the Egyptians, we look at pharaohs, we look at all of these pyramids, right? When we look inside of them, there's gold, there's silver, there's statues, there's monuments devoted to them. But what happened is they didn't take any of these things with them. They were a waste. They were just left behind. For all of us to be able to look at now, but kind of laugh at that idea, thinking that they could take those things with them. But just like how we laugh at them, we are doing the exact same thing, right? Being so focused on trying to get the best filter, uploading the best picture that we have, getting the most likes, and being consumed by that. So what is it that you are trying to go after? What is it that you are trying to pursue? Because this will determine the outcome of your life and how you will live. And so the last thing I want to talk about in verse 24, where he says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So what you treasure will demand your worship. There's only two options here that Jesus gives. Either you store up treasures here on earth, meaning you live your life for what you can get here and now, or the second option is you store up treasures in heaven, You are living not for this life, but for the next life, for things that are eternal. And the challenge that Jesus is also giving here is, man, as disciples, our loyalty cannot be divided. We can't teeter the line of, man, I want to live for my life here on earth, but I also want to make it to heaven. Jesus is saying you have to be sold out for one or the other. You can't walk this gray line and feel like you can have the best of both worlds. I think that's what social media, that's what TV, that's what shows, that's what all of these things tell us. That's what Satan is trying to tell us, is that we have a choice, but the reality is that we don't. And when I was diving into these words that Jesus said here, kind of the end of verse 24, how you cannot serve both God and money. The Greek word for serve is doulio. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong, but just bear with me. And what doulio indicates is that, man, this is the work of a slave, not an employee. And so what I mean by that is, when we think that we are in control of what we treasure, we are completely deceived. Because what Jesus is saying here is that we will be a slave to one of these things. So we have to choose what we want to be a slave to. Do we want to be a slave to Satan? Do we want to be a slave to our desires? And when you're a slave, you have no choice but to give in to whatever your master requires you to do. Or we can be a slave to God. We can be a slave to Jesus, where he calls us further on in Matthew, friends. That we are no longer slaves. We are no longer servants, but that we are friends of Jesus. So I want to ask you guys, how does Satan deceive you into believing the things in this life matter so much more than they really do? Doesn't he put in our mind that, man, what we need to get here and now is so important that we need to stop everything else that we're doing to go after it? I think one of Satan's biggest weapons right now is social media. Whether you have Instagram, you tweet, you're on Facebook, whatever app that you use, Satan is trying to use this to consume all of your time, to implant different ideas of what you need to live up to, right? These false expectations that if you don't achieve them, you will never be happy in life, right? He often points us to money, that if we have enough money, we will finally have the power and the authority that we have been craving for so long. Or if we finally get into a sexual relationship with someone, we finally get to have sex for the first time, man, you will be so happy. All of the things you ever worried about will finally leave you. Or he even comes at us with this idea of getting high. Man, if you smoke weed, you will no longer be anxious. You will no longer have any worries in your life because you will be completely free. And Satan all the time is just pouring these ideas into our mind to make us feel like these are what are the most important things in our life and what we need to be diving into. Now, I saw this documentary recently called The Social Dilemma. And I don't know if any of you guys have watched it. It's on Netflix. I definitely recommend it. Ask your parents first. But what this documentary talks about is social media and all of the creators, whether it was the presidents of Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, whatever it was, how they literally designed it to be addictive. They designed it to be something that we can't go longer than 10 minutes without picking up our phone and checking our social media platforms, that we can't resist refreshing the page to see what else would come up, right? And I think that is all the work of Satan. Now, these things can be used to stay connected. I think a lot of us during this time are using it to be able to stay in contact with one another, but I think Satan wants nothing more than to consume our time with social media. And what's interesting is Satan disguises these things. He doesn't want you to know how fleeting and temporary these things on earth really are, right? With beauty, wanting makeup, wanting to look a certain way, trying to take pictures in a certain angle. But the reality is as we age, this beauty will not last. Or money, again, talking about when we have a certain amount of money that we will be complete. But he doesn't tell you that money doesn't bring happiness at all, or fame, this idea of wanting to be recognized by others, not wanting others to look at us in a bad light. But the reality is, man, all of these things will not last. And so here, kind of in closing, Jesus calls his followers to choose their master. The choice is up to us to choose God or to choose wealth, and to choose the outlook on our life. Right, a little bit further after this, Jesus goes into this idea of not worrying. And it directly correlates with this passage of what we choose to follow. Because either we will choose to have faith in God and believe that he will take care of all of our needs, or we will worry and be consumed with how can we get the most things here in this life now. And so the choice is ours, and it's on us to choose who we want to rule over us. Do we want Jesus and pursuing treasures in heaven, or are we trying to live this life for ourselves, getting everything we can while we can, but never truly attaining happiness? And so with that, I want to go over a couple of the discussion questions for us to be able to go over. The first one being, what do you treasure or value, and how does it have power or control over you? The second one is, when is the time that you were blinded because of something that you wanted, and what was the outcome? And the last one, how does Satan deceive you into believing the things in this life matter so much more than they really do? And so with that, Palm Beach, Broward, Miami, where will you choose to store up your treasures? Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. We are so excited about all that God is doing right here in Broward County, Florida.